As President and Commander-in-Chief, I have no greater responsibility than the security of the American people. And I am convinced that if this framework leads to a final comprehensive deal, it will make our country, our allies, and our world safer.
Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report. I'm Paul Gigot. That was President Obama Thursday announcing that the United States and its negotiating partners had reached a, quote, historic understanding with Iran, agreeing on the framework of a deal meant to block the Islamic Republic from developing nuclear weapons in exchange for the lifting of Western sanctions. Joining me now with a look at the details of the accord and what's left to be accomplished before a final June 30 deadline is Wall Street Journal columnist and deputy editor Dan Henninger and foreign affairs columnist Bret Stephens. So, Dan, a lot of details that we're going to talk about, but big picture, the president said a good deal. You agree?
No, I think it's a weak deal, Paul. And let's look at the big picture. When they began these negotiations in early 2013, the goal was to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon.
Still is, the president says.
Well, halfway through, they decided, and they claimed they saw this coming, Iran was not going to dismantle its nuclear infrastructure. What we have ended up with is a country that has 1 year, called the breakout period, to build a nuclear weapon. So they still remain with the ability to do what they wanted to do from the beginning. This is what is known as a threshold nuclear state. And because we have a threshold nuclear state in Iran, that puts in motion all the other dynamics that we have been worrying about proliferation around the Middle East, among other countries.
All right, Brett, let's talk about some of these specific weaknesses, holes in this framework agreement. Even the president concedes they've got a lot of work to do, which is odd considering how really cheering he was about the broader deal. But where are the big holes in your view?
Well, the biggest hole has to do with the inspections process. The president trumpeted the fact that the deal would include something called the additional protocol to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is basically a tougher set of inspections rules. But the deal does not include what you might call anytime, anywhere inspections, which are the sine qua non, the thing that you have to have if any kind of deal is going to be honored. Look, the terms of this deal could have been even better, at least on paper, but if you can't inspect it, our experience from past episodes of inspection, like North Korea, is that these types of regimes will cheat. And this deal provides Iran with ample opportunities to cheat and to rely on the Russians, especially, to cover for them at the UN.
There is also Iran was retaining its nuclear infrastructure in reduced form for the most part. I mean, the facilities are all essentially going to remain there. I guess the one exception is the plutonium facility at ARAK will be dismantled. And so
it's basically being redone. But it remains in
But it'll be a research reactor instead of a plutonium reactor.
Now, the second big element that remains vague is the lifting of economic sanctions. For all the pages of detail that they listed in the parameters, the sanctions piece is very unclear. The Iranians said in a news conference, their negotiators said, we expect these sanctions to be lifted when the final agreement is signed.
Immediately
in June. The Obama administration has always insisted that that was not going to happen unless Iran was in compliance. But once those sanctions begin to break apart and Western commercial interests go in there, it's Katie.
Yeah, the president said the sanctions will be phased out, but I think he's being a little slippery there because the toughest sanctions, which are the ones at the UN, those are the ones that are going to be, it seems to me as I read the agreement, will go, as the Iranians suggest, immediately.
And let's recall, Paul, that this is still an outline of an agreement, details to be worked out, presumably by the end of June. With any of these agreements, you know, the proverb, the devil's in the details, really does apply. And here the question is the Iranian method of cheating and also the Iranian method of negotiation hasn't been to sort of flagrantly flout terms of any agreement. They have basically kind of worked their way out of it step by step, so no one particular violation is enough to trigger a major international response. And by the way, let's remember, we've been here before. I mentioned the additional protocol earlier. The Iranians agreed to the additional protocol in 2003.
Once before.
And then walked out of it a couple years later.
Yeah, so this also raises the question of what happens if they do cheat or are suspected of cheating. In the summary of the agreement, it looks like they're going to have to go to a process in the United Nations.
To be specified later.
But to be specified later. And we know what that means. It sounds suspiciously like a United Nations committee, which might as well be, lost in space. It's just not, it's going to take forever to try to settle these things before anybody could act to stop Iran.
Right. And while the world is going through these processes, the Iranians will be sitting there, albeit with a somewhat restricted nuclear program, building forward to that bomb.
But the president, I think, did achieve what he wanted politically here, which is to get the appearance of momentum going forward. And he's probably stopped Congress, Brett, from being able to reimpose or strengthen sanctions between now and
There is
June.
no question he's bought time with a constituency that matters to him most, which is to say the 16 Democrats in the Senate who had signed on to a previous version of what we call the Kirk-Menendez bill on additional
sanctions.
He'll be able to take the case to them. Look, we've made enough progress that you've got to give me the benefit of the doubt. And I suspect that's going to be the process going forward. By the way, don't expect June 30th to be the date when we get a final deal. There are a lot of internal politics, most of all in Iran, to take place.
Well, and that's the only thing that'll stop it at this point, I would suggest. Would only if Iran walks away, because I think the president's going to grab hold of Zarif's leg.
No question. It will only be Khamenei's ideological fixations that will stop this from happening.
Yeah, I agree with that, Brett.